conductor's baton kept moving for 7 minutes after his heart stopped. And the orchestra, they kept playing. My name is Dr. Elena Marsh. I was the second violinist in the Brennan Municipal Orchestra. October 19, 2023. That date is burned into my memory like a scar that never fades. The Cornerstone Theater on Ashmont Street, Seattle. You wouldn't know it now, it's a parking lot. But that night, that Thursday night with rain hammering against every window, it was still standing. Barely. The building had been scheduled for demolition for months. This was our final performance. One last concert before the wrecking crews arrived. 47 people in the audience. I counted them. Twice. By the end of this, you'll know why that theater was demolished 3 days ahead of schedule. And why I sold my violin the next morning for $20 to a pawn shop on 5th Avenue. Why I can't even walk past a music store without my hands starting to shake. What happened during that performance has no rational explanation, but I'm going to tell you exactly what I experienced. We arrived at 6:30 p.m., Seattle in October. The sky was already dark, storm clouds blocking out what little daylight remained. I remember thinking the theater looked wrong somehow. The windows reflected nothing, just black glass, even when our headlights hit them. Inside, the air felt thick, heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. Maestro Hermann Voss was already on stage when we entered. That was unusual. Hermann was always late, always rushing in with coffee stains on his shirt, apologizing with that crooked smile. But not that night. He stood at the conductor's podium, perfectly still, his back to us. When he finally turned around, I noticed his hand. They were shaking. Not the slight tremor of nervousness, a violent shake like he was freezing. "Good evening," he said. His voice sounded hollow, distant. "Please take your positions." No smile. No eye contact. Nothing. I sat down, opened my case, and pulled out my sheet music for Mozart's Requiem in D minor. We'd performed it dozens of times. A mass for the dead. Solemn. Beautiful. Standard classical repertoire. But when I looked at the pages, something was off. The notes were correct. The measures were right. But there were markings I'd never seen before. Small symbols in the margins. Circles. Dots connected by lines. Almost like star charts. I leaned over to Marcus Chen, our first violinist. "Did you get revised sheet music?" He glanced at his stand, then back at me. "What do you mean?" "The markings. These symbols." "Elena, there's nothing there." I looked again. The symbols were gone. Clean pages. Standard notation. 8:17 p.m. The house lights dimmed. The rain had gotten louder. I could hear it drumming against the roof, against the walls, even against the stage floor somehow. The acoustics in the Cornerstone had always been poor, but this was different. The rain sounded like it was coming from inside the building, from behind the plaster, from beneath the floorboards. Hermann raised his baton. The orchestra held their instruments ready. Then he did something I'd never seen him do in 15 years of performing together. He leaned forward, close enough that only the front row could hear, and whispered, "Don't stop playing. No matter what you hear." His baton dropped. We began. The introitus, the opening movement of Mozart's Requiem. Cello, soft and low. Then the violins joined, building, layering. It was beautiful. Perfect, even. For exactly 43 seconds. Then I heard it. Under the music. Another orchestra, playing the same piece. The same movement, but delayed. Half a second behind us, like an echo that came too slow. At first, I thought it was acoustics, the building's death rattle. Old walls bouncing sound in strange ways. But the delay was too precise, too consistent, and it was coming from behind the walls themselves, not from the audience, not from the ceiling, from inside the theater's structure. I glanced at Marcus. His face had gone pale. He heard it too. The audience sat in perfect stillness, row after row of motionless figures. I couldn't see anyone blinking, couldn't see anyone breathing. They just stared. Forward. At us. Through us. Would you have kept playing? We moved into the Kyrie. The second movement. The chorus joined, their voices filling the empty spaces. The wall orchestra grew clearer. I could distinguish individual instruments now. A flute bright and sharp. A bassoon deep and resonant. Violins. Multiple violins. Matching my exact fingering, my exact vibrato. But they were playing variations. Notes that existed in no version of Mozart I'd ever studied. Chromatic runs where there should have been sustained tones. Dissonance where there should have been harmony. Sarah Kemper, the violinist to my right, leaned close without breaking her bowing. Her voice was barely audible. They're playing what we're going to play. 3 measures ahead. I listened. She was right. The wall orchestra was performing our exact part, our exact phrasing, but 3 measures into the future. They knew what we were going to play before we played it. That's when I looked at Maestro Voss's face. His eyes were open, wide, staring at the back wall of the theater like he was watching something none of us could see. His mouth was slightly parted, and his skin, it had taken on a gray tone. The color of old newspaper, of ash, but his arms kept conducting. Perfect form, perfect timing, like his body was operating on autopilot while his mind had gone somewhere else entirely. Intermission was announced at 8:51 p.m. The house lights came up, harsh, sudden. The spell broke. Orchestra members immediately started talking, laughing nervously, making jokes about the haunted theater and its ghost musicians. Jessica Roth, our principal cellist, lit a cigarette despite the no-smoking policy. No one stopped her. I stood up, my legs weak. I needed air. Needed to leave. The exit was right there, 30 feet away, door slightly ajar, rain visible through the gap. I took 3 steps toward it. Then I saw them. All 47 audience members, still in their seat, still perfectly motionless, still staring forward. Not one of them had moved, not to stretch, not to check their phones, not to breathe, as far as I could tell. The woman in seat C-14 had her eyes open so wide I could see the bloodshot veins from the stage. Her hands were folded in her lap. She hadn't blinked in over 40 minutes. "They're not moving," I said to Marcus. He was tuning his violin, not looking up. "What?" The audience. "Look at them." He glanced out, shrugged. "Polite crowd, I guess." "Marcus, they're not blinking." "Elena, you're stressed. Old building, weird acoustics, final show. It's getting to you." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. Maybe. The woman in C-14's mouth opened. Just slightly. Rain began to drip from between her lips. Should I have run? Let me know in the comments. Intermission ended. We returned to our seats. Hermann Voss wouldn't look at us anymore. His gaze was locked on the back wall, on the space above the last row of seats. His hands had stopped shaking. They were perfectly steady now. Perfectly controlled. That was somehow worse. The house lights dimmed. We raised our instruments. The rain changed. It was no longer random. No longer chaotic. It had become rhythmic. Intentional. Matching the tempo Hermann's baton was indicating. Quarter notes. Eighth notes. A steady pulse that synchronized perfectly with our performance. The rain was playing with us. We began the sequentia. The dies irae. Day of wrath. Fast. Aggressive. The most dramatic movement of the Requiem. The wall orchestra was louder now. Much louder. I could barely hear Sarah's violin next to me over the sound of instruments that didn't exist playing music that came from nowhere. Then Jonathan Ellis's cello made a sound I'll never forget. Snap. His A string broke. I saw it whip across his face, leaving a thin cut on his cheek. He stopped playing immediately, reaching for his bleeding skin. But the cello section didn't stop. The sound continued. Same tone, same pressure, same exact vibrato Jonathan used. His cello was still playing without him. I watched his bow. It was resting against his knee, not touching the strings. But the music continued. That's when I understood. We were the echo. We were copying them. The wall orchestra was the original. We were the imitation, the reflection, the thing that came after. Hermann's conducting changed. His movements became jerky, mechanical. His arms bent at angles that weren't natural, weren't anatomically possible. His right elbow hyperextended, the joint bending backward as his baton traced complex patterns in the air. His shoulders rotated in opposite directions. His neck tilted too far to the left, vertebrae visible beneath the skin. Then his mouth opened and a voice came out that wasn't his. Deep, resonant, like multiple voices speaking in unison. Lacrimosa Secunda, the second weeping. There is no Lacrimosa Secunda in Mozart's Requiem. Mozart died before completing the Requiem. His student Susmer finished it. But this movement, this title doesn't exist in any version. Not in Mozart's fragments. Not in Susmer's completion. Not in any manuscript in any archive anywhere in the world. Yet we began to play it. Our fingers moved without our permission. Our bows drew across strings in patterns we'd never learned. The music that came from our instruments was alien, wrong, beautiful and horrible at the same time. The rain became a roar. The music from the walls changed. It was no longer orchestral. It was screaming. But the screams came from instruments, violins shrieking, cellos moaning, flutes crying in frequencies that human vocal cords couldn't produce, brass instruments wailing like dying animals. Hermann Voss collapsed. His body hit the podium with a wet thud. His eyes were still open, still staring at the back wall. But his chest wasn't moving. His baton, still clutched in his right hand, continued conducting. Down, side to side, precise, perfect. The fingers didn't move. The wrist didn't flex. But the baton traced patterns in the air above his body like it was being pulled by invisible strings. I tried to stop playing. I couldn't. My fingers moved independently. My left hand pressed strings I'd never learned. My right hand drew the bow in long, agonizing strokes that made my violin sing notes that hurt to hear. Blood began to seep from beneath my fingernails where the strings cut into my flesh. I could feel the wetness, the warmth, but I couldn't stop, couldn't lower my instrument, couldn't scream. Around me, the entire orchestra was trapped in the same nightmare. Marcus's face was frozen in terror, but his hands played with flawless precision. Jessica's cello sang despite her tears streaming down her face, despite her mouth open in a silent scream. The audience's mouths opened in unison, all 47 of them. Same moment, same angle, jaws unhinging like they were drowning on dry land. Rain poured from their throats, not dripped, poured. Gallons of water cascading from their mouths, flooding down their chins, soaking their clothes, pooling on the floor. The sound was deafening. Waterfalls, dozens of waterfalls filling the theater. But they didn't move, didn't choke, didn't drown. They just sat there, rain pouring endlessly from inside their bodies, eyes still locked forward, watching us perform. Behind the walls, the plaster began to crack. Thin lines appeared in the surface, then wider gaps, then chunks falling away, revealing the spaces between the studs. Shadows moved in those spaces, figures, human-shaped, holding instruments. The wall orchestra revealed itself. They were translucent, gray, like smoke given form, like memory made solid. Their instruments looked wrong. The violin bows were made from bones. I could see the joints, the knuckles. The cello bodies were rib cages. The brass instruments were hollow skulls with keys grafted onto jawbones. They played with perfect technique, and they were looking at us. 9:34 p.m. 77 minutes after we'd started. The music stopped, all at once, mid-measure, like someone had cut a wire. The rain fell silent. Hermann's baton dropped from his dead fingers and clattered against the podium. The shadow musicians in the walls faded. The plaster gaps sealed themselves. The cracks disappeared like they'd never existed. My hands lowered my violin. I could move again. The audience members collapsed forward. All 47. Their heads hit the seats in front of them with identical thuds. The water that had poured from their mouths evaporated. Just gone. Like it had never been there. The theater was completely dry. 4 of us survived. Marcus Chin, Jessica Roth, Thomas Bordeaux, our principal trumpet, and me. The rest of the orchestra, I don't know what happened to them. They were alive when the performance ended. They walked off stage. They got in their cars. But none of them remember that night. I've tried to talk to them. They look at me like I'm describing someone else's life. I wasn't there, they say. I've never played at the Cornerstone. You must be thinking of someone else. The police investigation took 6 hours. All 47 audience members were dead. Cause of death, drowning. Their lungs were full of water, completely saturated. The medical examiner said it was impossible. There was no water source, no explanation for how that much liquid could enter their bodies so quickly. The water smelled like copper and old wood, like the inside of the Cornerstone's walls. Hermann Voss's autopsy revealed something else. He'd been dead for approximately 7 minutes before his heart officially stopped registering on the paramedics' equipment. Brain activity had ceased at 9:27 p.m., but his body had continued conducting until 9:34 p.m. 7 minutes of conducting after clinical brain death. The recording equipment we'd set up to archive the performance captured nothing. 5 hours of footage showing an empty stage. Static on the audio tracks. No orchestra. No music. No audience. Just rain. The other 3 survivors and I don't talk anymore. We tried at first. Support groups. Therapy sessions. Attempting to piece together what happened, why we were spared, what we'd actually witnessed. But every conversation ended the same way. With the sound of instruments playing in the distance. Too far away to identify. Too close to ignore. My violin sold for $20 at Mike's Pawn on 5th Avenue. I watched the shopkeeper put it in the back room. I left before he could ask why my hands were shaking. Sometimes, late at night when the rain hits my apartment windows, I still hear it. That orchestra in the walls. Playing music we haven't performed yet. Playing Lacrimosa Secunda. The third weeping. Have you ever heard music that had no source? Instruments playing in empty buildings? Melodies that follow you home? Let me know in the comments, because I need to know if I'm the only one who hears them getting louder. The Cornerstone Theater was demolished on October 22, 2023. 3 days ahead of schedule. The construction company refused to explain why. The workers who started the demolition quit after 4 hours. They wouldn't say what they'd heard inside the walls. The lot stayed empty for 8 months. No one would build there. No one would buy the land. Last week, someone left an envelope in my mailbox. No postage. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized. Hermann Voss's handwriting. Inside was sheet music. 23 pages. Handwritten. The title at the top in Hermann's distinctive script. Lacrimosa Secunda, The Surfacing. It's addressed to the 4 of us who survived. Marcus Chin, Jessica Roth, Thomas Bordeaux, Elena Marsh. Our names written in the margins. Our exact parts transcribed. Music I've never seen before but somehow feel like I've played 1,000 times. There's a note at the bottom of the last page. It says, Performance date, October 19, 2024. Same theater. Same time. The orchestra is waiting. But the theater doesn't exist anymore, does it?